Excellent. We'll go ahead and get started. And as folks join us, we'll be happy to have them. Welcome to See It to Believe It, visualizations and interactive tools to inspire your next center. My name is Molly Wheeler. I'm one of the deputy directors at the Utah League of Cities and Towns. We're really excited today to partner on this webinar and this toolkit with some really great partners in planning. Today we have folks from the Wasatch Regional Council as well as People and Place. A few housekeeping items before I introduce our great panel and turn it over to them. First, this webinar is being recorded. So if you have a question you want to revisit later or want to share it with someone who is not able to attend live, this will be posted on our YouTube. You are free to see it there. Second, we will be sharing the slides with that as well. So you don't need to take pictures or notes or anything like that unless you want to, but we will be sharing these slides later. Third, we will be taking questions at the end of this. We want to make sure that our panelists are able to present all of the great information and this toolkit that they've prepared. So if you have questions, feel free, you can submit them at any time, but we won't be answering them until the end. What is the most helpful for us is if you can actually use the Q&A box that you can see at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. When you do that, it lets us pair the answer to the question, which is really helpful to move forward. And if not, we'll try to keep an eye on the chat for any questions that end up in there, but just know that you're kind of risking it a little bit whether or not we see that, find that in the broader chat conversation. So with that, I will introduce our panel and turn it over to them. We have Ted Knowlton, who is the Chief Planner and Deputy Director at the Wasatch Front Regional Council, Christy Ostema, who is the owner of People in Place, as well as Tim Watkins, who is a community planner with WFRC as well. And Tim, with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Molly, and we really appreciate Utah League of Cities and Towns for organizing this webinar today, inviting your many member and partners across the state. And we're excited that you're all participating with us today. And so today we'll hear first from Ted Knowlton, and he's going to talk about why we would want a center and what they are and why they matter. We'll then hear from Christy Ostema, who was part of the consultant team that helped create this new website and set of resources. And she'll be talking about the insights that we learned from Utah planners as we went through a statewide engagement effort. And then I'll take us on a tour of the new virtual center's website to conclude. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ted.
Okay, Tim, hey, thank you. And everybody out there, it's great to be with you. Why have a center? When we're talking about a center, we're talking about a place that's a great place to go on a walk. You're enjoying it while you're there. There is a mix of homes and destinations. There's places to walk to, shopping, maybe a library, maybe a great plaza. And you know you are there because when you arrive, it feels a little bit more intense and vibrant than the surrounding community. That's all we mean when we say a center. Now, centers come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. Communities have collaborated together in the Wasatch Choice Vision to think about the centers that they have, they want to enhance, and that they want to create over time. And they've been engaging in that work for almost 20 years. We recently took a step back and asked the question, how are they working? How are centers functioning in our broader community? And we have really seen significant progress. This is an example of one center in South Jordan, the Daybreak community. Just in the last 15 years, we have seen the number of homes in a city or town center actually double from 74,000 in 2010 all the way up to 150,000 just in 15 years, a really significant amount of growth in centers. But the idea of centers is not intensity everywhere. It's focused activity, vibrancy in places where it synergizes with transportation. So here you see a range of different kinds of centers, different colors, but you'll see they're coordinated with red lines, major roadways, or big dashed gray lines, high capacity or regionally significant transit. Think of light rail or a bus rapid transit, things like that. So they're coordinated in those locations, but see how they are not covering the whole landscape. The idea is that in each community, when you have a center, it works with and is complementary to quieter suburban neighborhoods to together provide a broad variety of housing options in a community. By allowing more growth in a city or town center, we're actually taking pressure off of needing to grow in those quieter neighborhoods or even extend growth into a rural area, which is denoted in this graphic with green. So they're part of an overall approach to our community. Because centers are coordinated with transportation, it helps us get to more destinations. We estimate that an average household in the greater Wasatch Front has the freedom to pick from 360,000 job opportunities. Now, I use this word job opportunities, but you can think of this as destinations, places to shop, places to work, places to visit. The freedom to go and explore and be part of the community by coordinating our city and town centers with transportation. The benefits don't stop there, they extend. People that live and work in a city or town center, they have destinations nearby them. They can walk and bike. They tend to be closer to public transportation. On average, a household in a city or town center actually drives about 25% less than other households. Think about how that adds up. When we have 150,000 homes in city and town centers, it means about 800,000 miles of driving do not happen on our roads because of those city and town centers. Benefits we all enjoy. It doesn't stop there. The households that live and work in centers, they don't occupy as much space per household. And that adds up too. It means that we actually save 40 square miles of farmland and open space across our region from that growth efficiency in city and town centers. Likewise, we don't have as much land that we irrigate in those households in city and town centers. That adds up to saving us about, wait for it, 30 million gallons of water per day saved from allowing and enabling a bit more of our growth in city and town centers. Now, we've seen a lot of growth in city and town centers. When you look ahead and you think about where we're going, there's never been more interest in this approach. So just a few years ago, all the communities that collaborate together in the Wasatch Choice Vision were thinking about, hey, it makes sense for us to work on 221 centers of various types. You can see them there: metro, urban, city, neighborhood center. And we came back and we asked them again just in 2025, what do you want to work on now? And they said, it's actually more like a doubling of the centers that we want to work on in our communities, now 393. So these are regional benefits. That's kind of a regional story, but I think what really resonates is each community is thinking about, where's the heart of my community? Where's the place that people will gather? This is the heart of Bountiful's downtown, right near me. This is my hometown, Bountiful, Utah. And I've just loved seeing this become the place where Bountiful comes together and gathers. People know they're going to have something fun to do as they go into this walkable environment of Bountiful's downtown. So that's the why of a city or town center and what we mean when we talk about that. So now I'll hand the baton over to Christy to get in and start setting the stage for understanding this new tool or resource. Christy?
Sounds great, Ted. Thank you. So yeah, we'll take a look at insights from Utah planners and also get a sneak peek of some of the new images on the Visualizing Center's website. So let's dive in. But first, We really want to thank the Land Use Training Fund for making this project possible. This is meaningful across our state, so we're so grateful for that. And then also, you can see that we've got a design and analysis team. We're grateful to them. And really a shout out to the advisory committee. Do you see your name on the list or someone you know? The advisory committee helped steer the creation of the center's website. So, really making us ensure that it's a useful community asset for the whole state. So last year, the committee worked with the project team to create a questionnaire to collect feedback from planners about the potential for mixed-use centers, really with the goal again of creating a community resource that's useful statewide. So communities large and small across 24 of 29 counties in the state responded. So let's take a look at a few of those survey questions. Now, the first batch of questions really gives us a feel for what's going on the ground all across the state. So we asked, is there a central gathering place with retail or entertainment destinations that you would want to invite out of town guests to? So does your city have that kind of space? So the majority of the communities said that they lacked a center that's a fun destination. And the images that we created as a part of this process really respond to that. So together we can imagine this center perhaps. It's probably comfortable in many communities. Take a look at the ground floors of the buildings, see the shops, the restaurants, the services. Take a look at the housing above those and check out the gathering area with the outdoor seating. There's a shady place to play, a green for community events or maybe just hanging out. And then another really cool thing about this is the shared parking. You see it tucked into the middle of the block. It's so convenient. There's auto access to the center, but the block itself is comfortable and it's friendly for those who are walking. So we hope this type of space would be a fun place to enjoy with friends and family. So another question. Communities were asked if their centers have general plan policy support and zoning support. And you can see that a majority had the support for all or most of their centers. And as you know, plans and supporting codes take a lot of effort. You know this, but you also know they're essential as a community works with property owners and developers to build a center. We asked cities how many centers or mixed-use corridors were contemplated in their community. Take a look at the tallest bar there. You can see about 1/3 of people answered with 2 to 3 centers, but there was definitely a range. We also asked, what is the range of building heights that could be built? And answers again varied significantly based on market opportunities, the unique vision of each community. And then we asked if there are mixed use areas in the community today or any historical precedents. And you see the deep shades of green? Those are historic downtowns or other existing centers. But really, what really stands out to me are the light green segments, the tops of each of the stacks there. It looks like close to half of the centers are in the planning stages, so they don't even exist yet. And that gives us a reason really to imagine together what centers could be like in the future. So take a look at this image. This is from the website. Do you have a tired, older commercial space in your community? Maybe a place that's ripe for reinvestment? So here you can see that type of space. It's reimagined as a mixed-use center with housing, smaller scale retail, restaurants, services, gathering space. So we looked to planners to get the lay of the land in the survey, but we also wanted to get insights into what people imagine in centers. So we asked smaller communities what buildings represent the desired character of a center. And this might not surprise you, but the most popular buildings in green there are similar to buildings we see in historic town centers in Utah. Many of them are brick, lower level commercial, upper level office, or residential uses. And then we also asked smaller communities about buildings that could support ground floor flexibility. So these are spaces that can foster small businesses when markets support that, while allowing for residential uses as an alternative when other uses don't make sense. So imagine a community focuses activity around just a block or two, maybe with an emphasis on flexibility. The buildings in this center could house small shops on the main floor if the market supported it, or they could support residential or live work units until demand for other uses develops. Really nice image there. And then all communities were asked to select from these images to define preferred elements for mixed-use centers. You can see what's most popular in the green there again. Lots of public spaces for activities, dining, ground floor uses. And then here you can see the top elements and amenities as identified by respondents for a mixed-use center. So you can see they include well-connected walkable streets with ambience and amenities. So think about pedestrian-scaled streetlights, seating areas, art, interactive activities. And then those things are supported closely by places to gather, recreate, and eating. And then those things supported by on-street parking, nearby parking that's less visible from the street. And this helps illustrate that. Imagine how several of those things work together for a walkable community with a gathering space as the focal point. See the connected streets? They're walkable with a variety of destinations and attractions. Architecture is pedestrian and scaled, very people friendly, and there are choices to get around. Car, on foot, by bike, and you can see transit there too. And here's a version that's a little bit more intense than the last image. You can see that it combines lots of those same amenities to really become a heart of a larger community. Can you see all of the ways people get around? Look at the sidewalks, the dedicated bike lanes right in the street there, the transit. See the ground floor retail and restaurants? There's a large gathering area. See how in this image, most parking is internal to buildings? There's the density there that supports that. And then we realized that internal structured parking is actually not cost feasible for many centers. So other parking strategies become super important. So we asked about parking strategies and what could help minimize surface parking area. Top response, take a look at that. It's really looking for opportunities to share private parking. And then other ideas that were supportive included establishing public parking districts. So basically another form of shared parking, then rear garages, and then increasing on-street parking. So lots of options. So check out this corridor. You can see mixed-use buildings with rear shared parking areas. And then you see the garages tucked behind the buildings as well. And then this image illustrates parking options as well. You see the mixed-use buildings with rear parking areas. Yes, they're underneath the solar panels. And you see the garages tucked again behind the buildings. And then looking through the trees, you can see street parking. So parking is really plentiful, but it doesn't interfere with the plaza, the cafe, and other uses that are really close to the street in a walkable area. So we learned from many of you through the survey as we crafted visuals that we hope are really helpful to everyone in the state. And we also looked at on the ground examples for guidance. So let's take a look at one quickly. This is a real project in Utah. It's a fairly new mixed-use development at Daybreak again in South Jordan. Where's the parking? Well, you can see that some of it's on the street, but let's check out the middle of the block. So mid-block, the project is surface parked, so that's a lot less expensive than internal parking. And you can see the carports as well as the garages here. The approach is of course less expensive, but it also supports significant residential density. So it still really matters. It includes a variety of housing types here. You see 5-story elevator served apartments, 3 to 4-story walk-ups, townhomes. Again, parking is accessible, but not very visible from public streets and sidewalks. And then each new household and resident generates demand for retail in the area. So here you can see a bit of corner retail, again, supported by on-street parking right out front. That's what retail loves. And then here's a larger view of the area. So next door to the residential area that we just took a look at is a block of commercial use. So the gray was the residential, the commercial's in red. You see the Harmons? So with that commercial retail use nearby, there's limited retail demand in the residential building, but rather that residential helps support the retail in the next block. So you see the opportunity here? It's a great example of a community working together with developers to identify present and future demand for neighborhood retail and services, making sure that mixed use zoning is in alignment with market reality. That matters so much. So it's a great on the ground example that inspired images on the website. And now Tim's going to walk us through the site.
Great. Thanks so much, Christy, for summarizing what we've learned about centers from communities large and small across our state. And I'm excited to now take everyone on a tour of the Virtual Center's website. I'd like to ask you each to keep in mind as I go through this, if you could think of how these images could be useful in your community. And just a quick little primer list here. Think of early stages of public engagement and visioning for general plan updates, more specific small area plans. Center images could provide perspective in a public hearing for a proposed annexation or rezone, or the images could be used as a starting point for a new mixed-use zoning code or test the effectiveness of an existing code. Planners could include images in staff reports, share in public meetings and presentations. Images could support property owner and developer conversations to inspire great projects and explore possible public-private partnerships. Also think of potential neighborhood outreach to explore compatible land use transitions from an established residential area to an emerging center. And then any number of web, social media, or printed publications, these images are ready for use. All right, so I'm going to click on wasatchchoice.org/centers, and we arrive at the home page. And this provides a brief introduction and a link to the statewide feedback that Christy just summarized. And further down on the home page, you see the main gallery for each center type. The top row includes the 4 center types that were featured in the Wasatch Choice Vision that Ted covered, but we want to emphasize that these are definitely applicable to communities across the entire state. And then on the second row, you see a small town center gallery that shows possibilities for smaller rural communities, and then a mixed-use corridor gallery that explores a linear variation of neighborhood center or a city center along a busy street. And then coming soon will be a more detailed look at comparative metrics of beneficial impacts that centers bring to communities. We'll come back to this gallery and take a deep dive, but first let's scroll a little further down. And we see here the image that Ted shared as he described how centers can provide significant benefits to a community and to the region. And you can also use this image to describe how various center types can connect between neighborhoods and communities, provide more transportation choices. And here's a similar image of a less intense scale of centers that shows that connectivity between centers, communities, and providing convenient access to surrounding residential areas. And then just below is where we keep a record of recordings of webinars. And so today's presentation will be added soon to this section. And then finally, at the bottom of the home page and all gallery pages, you'll find links to download all of the images for each center type. So for example, if I click on the city center icon, all of the graphics will be downloaded as one zipped folder onto your desktop. These include bird's eye perspectives of the existing land use conditions, future center alternatives, and several close-up scenes. There's an image set with annotations describing key features of a successful center, as you see here, and an image set without text so that you can create your own narrative. And there are different resolutions and file sizes. You can project digitally onto large screens in a public meeting or include small images in online surveys, or you could print large posters or smaller documents and handouts. So very versatile there. All right, so let's get back to the centers gallery and dive into the neighborhood center. As you'll see 4 scenarios. At the top of each scenario, there's a description that describes some of the differences between them and key community characteristics, such as the scale, the parking format, the presumed transit use. Here is a view, slider view of existing land use condition, in this case, a greenfield with existing residential area and how the new growth relates to that. This is an image map that shows where there are more detailed views. So you click on a view, it takes you to what we call a vignette or a more detailed scene. You can click on the different components and read more information about how these different ingredients on the menu or different elements combine together to create a successful center. Let's go to scenario C, also in the neighborhood center. And we're going to skip ahead to another type of view that you see on the image map. Instead of selecting the vignette view, I've selected the panorama view. And this is really the virtual experience on the website. This allows you to go into a more of a virtual environment. You can still click on the different icons and read about the features that combine together to make this a successful and exciting place to visit, live, or work. And then you have control over the panning. You can pan to the right, to the left, tilt up, tilt down, zoom in and out. Here we can kind of study the relationship of buildings with active ground floor uses, the parking supporting in the rear, on-street parking, walkable streets, and transit within easy access to reach businesses, jobs, and shopping opportunities. I'll share one more image here from the Neighborhood Center's gallery. It features a gradual transition of land use intensity from the existing single-family neighborhood in the foreground to a similar scale of new residential development across the street. And then as the land use intensity gradually increases towards the middle of the neighborhood center, where you see more housing choices, shopping, jobs, and a central gathering place. And you'll find that in all of the center types, there is an attempt to depict a thoughtful transition of building height and land use transition from existing residential areas to a virtual neighborhoods or center type. Okay, I'm going to take a quick dive into the small town gallery. And you'll see a couple of options here that shows a center doesn't need to be large to create positive impacts in a community. We're looking at a scenario on one or two corners of a central intersection in the community near the town square. These buildings are shown at street corners with walkable streets, rear parking, and are designed with that residential or flexible ground floor commercial space that Christy talked about. Could be inviting for new businesses. You know, even a rural community could explore this type of development where there's not even a sewer system if there's sufficient open area or pasture area where a larger septic system could be installed. All right, I'll briefly go into one more center type. Christy shared the existing condition of maybe a tired commercial district and maybe a redevelopment opportunity. Scenario A shows options for up to 3 stories of building intensity. And note that the additional housing that's shown here, the variety of housing types, supports some of the existing retail that remains. And here's another alternative of the same area that looks just 1 more story in height, a little more building intensity, adding more housing choices, shopping, dining, and jobs. But you see there's an effort to create a comfortable transition, in this case along the busier arterial streets, relating well to the surrounding residential areas. And here's a detailed view of gathering space with a 3-story context. You see the shared surface parking tucked in the middle of the block, a food court with outdoor seating areas, and it's right on the bus line, and walking and biking options as well. And here's the same plaza space and gathering option with the 4-story context. So here's one more image from the city center gallery. Imagine walking or biking to pay a visit to this corner store, parking on the street if you're in a car, or hopping off the bus. And you might even live above and enjoy all the amenities that the city center has to offer. Okay, so I mentioned a more detailed view of beneficial impacts that centers can bring to a community. I'm going to touch briefly on those, give you a sneak preview. They should be getting to the website soon, but we'll look at the potential walk, bike, and transit trip benefits that centers bring, fiscal and economic benefits, infrastructure efficiency, water use efficiency, and the social benefits of creating a center as a heart in a community. All right, so here's a summary comparing the potential ratio of walking and biking and transit use, potential those types of trips per acre for each center type. And you can see that as the center intensity increases, there are more people living and working in closer proximity to services and destinations. And this increases the demand for walking, biking, transit, electric scooters, and other transportation choices. Let's look at fiscal and economic benefits of centers as a great economic development strategy. This graph compares the estimated sales tax and property tax revenues per acre generated by the different center types featured on the website. So the red layer on the bottom, this represents the sales tax revenues from retail sales and services. The yellow layer represents the sales tax generated from residents in a center clicking and making purchases online, and that'd be for anything that's delivered to their doorstep or a locker box. The blue layer is the statewide population distribution of sales tax. Last year it was $142 per resident, and with more people living in a center, that layer of revenues increases substantially. And then the green, this is property tax revenues that grows the building real estate intensity increases in a center. Here's a similar chart that estimates the demand for retail from residents living in a center. It's shown as the potential spending on taxable goods and services per acre. And this spending supports existing businesses and creates demand for new businesses. Let's look at street and utility costs per unit. Again, we're looking at lower intensity on the left, greater intensity to the right. And we're also comparing it to a typical kind of residential neighborhood that might be surrounding a center. And so each housing unit and a commercial unit, which is defined as 1,000 square feet, the cost per unit to build and maintain infrastructure decreases substantially as the center intensity increases. And this is even true from an engineering standpoint, with higher costs for streets that provide more space for transit, on-street parking, wider sidewalks for walking and outdoor seating in a center, and the larger diameter necessary to support mixed-use development, larger pipe diameters. All right, so this is a focus on outdoor water use. Ted mentioned that there's substantial water conservation associated with centers, and the bottom line of outdoor water use is that it returns to the atmosphere when we irrigate our landscapes. And this is water that does not return to rivers and lakes. And in centers, households have a much smaller individual yard, patio, or deck space compared to larger yards in conventional residential areas. So there's substantial water conservation. And then the indoor water associated with centers is water that is returned to rivers and lakes. So this is just a combination of the outdoor and indoor water per unit. And so in conclusion, I'd just like to reference the social benefits of gathering as a community in a center. And this is hard to measure and quantify, but very easy to enjoy. And so here are some photos of a giant pumpkin festival taking place in one of my favorite centers in Logan. This is the Center Street area. The street itself was closed off for this large community gathering, kind of like a big outdoor living room to celebrate the harvest in Cache Valley. All right, so there's much more to see on the Virtual Center's website. We've reached the end of our tour, but would love for you to visit and explore options for creating or enhancing centers in your community. And we hope that you will download the images and find meaningful ways to include them in your community planning conversations. So let's have some questions, some discussion, and thanks again for this opportunity today.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim, Ted, Christy. Amazing. We'll go ahead and open it up for questions and answers. As we mentioned, just pop them into the Q&A box as you are able, and we will work through them. If they're in the chat, we'll try to catch them, but we make no guarantees. Our first question from Matthew Gibbons: how can cities and towns with universities work to integrate more closely with each university? Walkable, mixed-use areas nearby to universities are lacking in Utah compared to other states. I don't know who wants to take that one, but I'll just throw it out to the group.
Could you please repeat that? I just want to make sure I understand the full
Yeah,
question.
happy to. So it is, how can cities and towns with universities work to integrate more closely with each university? Walkable, mixed-use areas nearby universities are lacking in Utah compared to other states.
Yeah. Well, nothing like starting with a tough one. That is an awesome question. And I think part of the reason why we don't see this happen more often is that the quiet neighborhoods that might be near a university, they're worried about encroachment of parking impacts or perhaps building types that they don't necessarily feel are compatible. Meanwhile, on the other side, the more housing opportunities we have near universities, there's a natural benefit there, and it can add to walkability. I think this is a perfect question within the spirit of, how do we create centers? I think, when I reflect on the resources that we presented here, and really even the basic notion of centers, it's trying to think about what's the right location. What's the location that provides a little bit of the win-win? Maybe it's an area it's already not sort of a quiet, it's not right next to a quiet residential neighborhood. Maybe it's got a little bit of a commercial character and it can shift further and become more of a walkable destination. Maybe that's a starter suggestion back to the really good and also frankly challenging question is there's got to be a shared community sense of what are the locations where it's that, that win-win of, look, we can create a center kind of atmosphere, walkable destination, and it's also going to be acceptable to the broader community. Start there, then the details can flow from that.
I just
I can
quickly want to.
maybe go ahead.
Oh, please go ahead, Christy.
Okay, I can just maybe reference a community directly. Ogden City has done a really amazing job over the years working on economic development and business with Weber State. And they're also now starting to explore opportunity along their OGX line, where there's maybe some older, tired commercial, and starting to explore what that sweet spot is that Ted was talking about between providing some more housing, some needed amenities for nearby neighborhoods, while also not encroaching heavily on them. So a good place to chat with if you want an example.
I'm similarly, Christy, thinking of Utah State and Logan and efforts to connect downtown Logan with the university via transit. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you all. Our next question, and keep them coming in the chat, please, or pardon me, in the Q&A boxes, please. John Jansen asks, do we have any economic data that discusses the population needed to try to establish a small town center? Lots of small towns may have a park, but nothing else to promote it as a gathering place.
I appreciate that question, John. And a certain population threshold does not come to mind, but what does come to mind is that any town where there is a demand for a variety of housing options, which is probably any town, a condo, an apartment. I think what's key in some of the information that's been shared and molded into these visual depictions is the flexibility of the use. So if there's ripeness and readiness for business on the ground floor, that's great, but perhaps that needs to start out as a residential use on the ground floor, but designed to be convertible and adaptable. But I think a very small community could have success, and then if and when a business evolves, that's icing on the cake.
let me, Christy, you're welcome to jump in if you got one, but I got a little add-on. I think implied in the another awesome question is what's the anchor? What do you need in order to establish an anchor? And if the anchor is retail, then there's the retail dynamics question. Do you have enough buying power in the community to support a retail node? That's a very great question. And you do have to have a little bit of mass in the community, or supporting retail can be a challenge. But it's not always as simple as the population in the area. It can be how many cars are driving by. That can be part of the retail support question. But sometimes I think communities can find an anchor and it's not retail. It could be a civic destination, city hall, could be a library, could be even just a gathering place that is a little bit different, a plaza that people come together and gather in. So I think sometimes the anchor doesn't need to be retail, and then can therefore suggest you don't have to have a minimum size to make it work.
I love that, Ted. And it reminds me of, even if, let's say, maybe there's an office use on the ground level, or somebody has a small type of business, but maybe there could be an effort a couple of times a month over the summer to bring in a food truck and have people come and celebrate and gather and eat and have as close to retail experience as possible.
Excellent. Thank you both. Christy, anything you want to add?
Nope.
Excellent. All right. We will keep moving through. I'm excited for this next one. So Brittany Knudsen asks, I'm in Springville in Utah County, which I think is outside of your focus, but I'm really concerned that a new city center planned around the new Frontrunner station will drain our current historic downtown pedestrian traffic. UDOT won't approve planning bike lanes between them, and buses aren't super frequent. What ideas do you have to get pedestrians to our historic downtown? And I love this, that it kind of speaks to potentially two centers in a community and how you can support them both, and also the universality of centers. So I don't know who wants that, but I'll hand it over to you all.
I'm willing to wade into it. Another really tricky and excellent question. Really, really good question. Let me start. The very first note is that so you're seeing two WFRC people, but Mountain Land Association of Governments, which you are part of, is a partner, a full partner to the Wasatch Choice Vision. And I know that MAG and their program, TAG, the technical, I forget what TAG stands for, but their technical assistance program is available to be helpful too. So I just want you to know you're absolutely in the Wasatch Choice Vision, family, if I can say it that way. Now, to your question, I think it's a totally legitimate question. I think a nuanced or a detailed study could get at buying power questions and how can you establish a second center without hurting the first center. And so I just want to note that analysis and thoughtful planning can help answer the question, and then perhaps lay out different options to make sure that the second center doesn't harm the first. So it's not exactly a specific answer, but sort of a process answer. And I would suggest that maybe you look at like distinct roles. And so that a member of the community feels like, these aren't the same thing. They're very different. And because they're different, they add to the quality of life in my community. So that's a starter, but I love the question.
I do too. And I think just to build on what Ted said, I think a lot of times when we think of centers, we think of the really cool amenities around them. And a lot of times when we're looking at centers by transit, it's actually a lot of housing opportunity. And that may actually, if it's very carefully done, help your downtown as well.
Excellent. Thank you all. Tim, anything you wanted to add on that one?
No, thanks.
Perfect. I see that we have one question that I'll just kind of generalize a bit, which is if people want to ask more questions, is there somewhere they can go, someone they can contact to work on this more? Is there AOG the best? Is there a consultant that's best? What are next steps for folks that want to talk?
I was waiting to see if Tim wanted to jump in here, but the bottom line is we'd actually love, I know that Mountain Land would love to help, WFRC would love to help outside. If you're outside of those areas, there's other programs that are available. UDOT has the Technical Planning Assistance Program. So no matter where you are in the state of Utah, there's money and assistance to help. And we would love to help you. So I think that reach out to Tim or me at WFRC. We will give you some contacts at MAG, or we can even share them perhaps before we wrap here today. And we will include in the follow-up to this webinar contacts that also are at with UDOT outside of the greater Wasatch Front area. So hopefully that's...
I love the suggestion, and I think that some of the ideas that have been sparked in this webinar today, please email me. I just included my email in the chat, and I'd love to gather comments, thoughts, questions, and see where the conversation could go between any actual formal program.
You're also always welcome to reach out to any consultant that you like working with, and they can give you some suggestions too. So any of the above.
Excellent. We have a few more questions that have come in. Is there a best practice for how far apart certain types of numbers of centers should be from one another?
That's a great question. And I think of the different types of centers, including the more linear center. So some communities have an organization of centers evolving where there are nodal at kind of the land use around a couple of key intersections that might be a mile apart or a half a mile apart, but then the vision is to connect with a linear mixed use corridor that creates that continuation of walking demand, transit demand between the more center nodes. So there could be that opportunity. But I think similar to the prior question, just being thoughtful about what commercial services and businesses and needs might be different from one center to another, and that could inform the spacing as well. That I think it's also important to think that each new resident that's added to a community, particularly in a center, just adds to the retail demand, whether it's supporting existing businesses or adding new businesses, and doesn't take a whole lot of commercial to create that dynamic and the interest and the destination in a mixed use center.
Well, thanks, Tim. We'll hop to our next question. It seems like we should talk about having multiple changing activities in a center, the Roger Brooks philosophy. How important is a variety of things to do in a center?
Okay, I can jump in on this one. John, you keep having the great questions coming. Keep them coming, my friend. It's important if you want to have that kind of, if you want to have the kind of, let me back up. Sort of what I take from John's question is this notion that if you want to, there's an advantage in a center to training the community, the potential customers, the patrons in a community. You want them to have in this sense in their head that any given weekend there's something to do downtown. Any given weekend there's something to do downtown, and So part of the way you can do that is just by constantly programming things uh, in a center, especially if you don't have a broad variety of, retail activities or civic destinations that naturally create the sense of there's always something to do in any given weekend. And so sometimes by programming a lot of things in a center, you can compensate for a lack of retail and create this sense in a community that there's always something to do downtown. Part of the advantage of doing that is sometimes retailers will get the message that there's such a commitment to having people come to a center that then they will lean into, look, we can be there. We can feel like it's less of a risky proposition to be there, even if the residential support isn't there. So I just wanted to elaborate on John's good question. This isn't not something, John, that we have dug into with a community, but I think we could. We could explore this kind of question with a community if you wanted to. It gets at both the mix, the hooks, the things that bring people to a center, but maybe also the importance of programming events.
I'm just also thinking, thanks, Ted. That a good question. I appreciate that response, and I'm also thinking about the design of an emerging center. It might be initially more residential in demand and opportunity, but just even the design of the ground floor and the statement of this may be a business someday, or it's designed for live work, and creating that mix and that vibrancy expressed in the design, and not just a visual pretense, but an actual functional option to convert residential ground floor to future commercial. I think that could help with such momentum as well.
Thanks. If that's our last question in the Q&A box. I'm gonna kill time for a minute, see if anyone else has any other questions they want to plug in. Ask them now, or I won't say forever hold your peace, but be prepared to ask your questions to these great folks offline. Um, and thanks to everyone engaging in the chat. As was mentioned, centers are for everyone. This isn't just a WFRC thing or a MAG thing, city thing, town thing. Everyone can look at having a center. So I don't see any other questions coming in. So if you will all join me in thanking our panelists. Oh, never mind, we got one. Okay. Um, how can you create a center when the town is divided by a major roadway?
Christy, can I put you on the spot? I know that you worked with Heber City and they had a similar question.
Yeah, yeah. If you're familiar with Heber, Highway 40 runs right down their center of town. It's their main street. And they're actually looking at doing a bypass and hoping to take ownership of that section of Highway 40 over time and slow down speeds and um, just create a more walkable, wider sidewalk, more trees, medians, that kind of thing on that main street itself. But in the meantime, they're going full steam ahead on working on an alley just behind those buildings on Main Street, a really wide alley that's just pedestrian in nature, really becomes their community's living room. It links to really important public spaces. Their government buildings on the north, and there's some active uses there, like a splash pad. And then looking south, their city park, which is being reimagined as just a great urban regional gathering space. It includes an amphitheater now. They've closed a street. It's going to go into a lot of iterations over time, really providing a great experience for residents, but also tourists that stay and hang out in the area. So they're really reimagining the space and doing all they can, acknowledging that street is always going to be a busy one. So where else can we just very nearby create a space that's a little bit quieter, and just turn the volume down and still have a nice, vibrant, fun place for people walking around and hanging out.
And maybe I love that answer a ton. And I will also just say we can broach together the idea of maybe taming a major road, not saying no to traffic, but maybe we can slow the traffic. Maybe we can soften the right of way. There might be some things to look at there. Those can be tricky but they can be looked at. So
I think added to those two good responses and to a really good question might be helping a pedestrian feel up to the task of crossing the road from one cool place to another cool place on either side. And so whether that's pedestrian refuge or a combination of pedestrian activated signals, all of those elements could work together to cope with a busy road.
Excellent. Thank you all. Well, we're about at time. We don't have any other questions in the chat. So thank you all for joining us, sharing your expertise with us. To those on the chat, we hope that you will check out both of the really amazing toolkits that have come out this year, both the Centers Toolkit from today as well as the Missing Middle Toolkit. We had a webinar on that last month. You can learn more about that. But with that, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll call it a day. Thank you.